here on League Unlocked. My name's Eric, and we're running through our first edition of the Summer Split Power Rankings. Moving on to Europe, where the Fiesta continued on patch 8.11, and there were a handful of teams that took advantage of the Clown Fiestas much better than other ones. 3 2-0 teams to start Week 1, and coming up at the top of the Power Rankings after Week 1 is the 4-time champs G2 Esports. They were completely clobbering some competition, as well as Misfits and Vitality. Really, you could probably make an argument for either one of those 3 teams to be on the top spot. One of the great things for G2 for this meta is their main weak point last split was that bottom lane, but now you can just throw them on some ridiculous pick, something that Hjarnan might not have ever even played before, but you can kind of hide those weaknesses in and outside of the laning phase with some of these insane picks, and that's exactly what they did with a couple of Heimerdinger games for Hjarnan. More on that later, don't you worry. Misfits, an average game time of 24 minutes. 8 of the 10 teams in EU, by the way, averaging game times sub 30 minutes. Basically, if you're getting to 35 minutes across any region, you're in the late game, and it's a rare occasion where you're going to actually see guys getting 3 or 4 items, because the snowball is in full effect in this meta. You're picking for the early game with these Rift Heralds and all these Bruiser champions, and that's one of the main reasons why so many AD carries are not being picked anymore, because they just don't have the time to spike at 3 items, double zeal items, or whatever the new build paths are for AD carries. They don't have the time to build that up because you've got a Darius flashing into your face at level 11, and you have no chance. So those 3 2-0 teams definitely came out on top and have a good grasp of the meta so far. Coming in at number 4, we've got Fnatic, who might even be a little bit too high for them, but I was shocked that they tried again with the all-in on cap strategy. Just give him all the farm with the support of junglers. He goes smite mid, and he had like 400 CS before 30 minutes. Him and Perks were both running this Kaisa mid strategy. But game 1, you got Reckless on Janna. Game 2, he's playing Karma. I understand that this is just one comp that Fnatic is kind of tinkering around with, but that cannot be the optimal way to play with this roster. They did get a win against Schalke, which is why they're 1 spot ahead of them here on these power rankings, but I mean, that's not the way to be playing. Obviously, they're trying to figure out that one thing. I hope they have other ideas for what to be playing, what comps to run in this meta, because that clearly is not the best way for this team to be running. Although Caps is fantastic, and I think he's going to come through and prove to be the featured carry on this squad, especially in this meta. There's still champions Reckless can play. Schalke looked like they were actually going to lose against Unicorns, but were able to turn it around, and they did play close against Fnatic, but ultimately ended up losing that one. Then you have Roccat coming in at number 6. The only reason they're below the likes of Schalke and Fnatic is because their win was against H2K, and H2K was very disappointing in Week 1. I thought this might be a split where they could kind of prove it wasn't a fluke what they did in 2018 spring, kind of running out and finally getting a last playoff spot, and they performed well against Vitality. Took them to 5 games in the playoffs, so I had tempered expectations for them. Coming into 2018, we know Sheriff was an absolute animal, and even Shook, when he came into the lineup, was looking more and more like the Shook of 2014, which seems like ages ago. But this week, he was not looking like that. He had the Nocturne ults that he wasn't using for half the game, and then they were pretty underwhelming when he did end up using them. But Roccat in at number 6, and Giants as well. It's a similar theme for them, where their only wins came against H2K, which is why they're below the other 1-1 teams in Fnatic and Schalke. I'm not going to go too hard on Splice, even though they did go 0-2 on this week. They had a tough opening week. Very first game of the week was against Vitality, which is a rematch of the 3rd place match. They got pretty destroyed. Again, Heimerdinger bot lane. By the way, both games they had to play against Heimerdinger bot, so that if that's not tilting enough, I don't know what else could be. Then they play G2 to close out the week, so they had huge gaps in between their games, and obviously probably 2 of the top 4 teams from last split they had to play in the opening week, so not quite panic time yet for Splice, although they did not look nearly as good as you would have expected them to be against these competitive squads. I did maybe think they'd go 0-2, but not quite in that fashion. Unicorns did not look that great either. They had an early lead against Schalke, but other than that, they got completely clobbered by Misfits, and we already talked about H2K. H2K and Unicorns clearly the bottom two teams after Week 1. So who's the MVP for Week 1 in EU? Well, there were a lot of stellar performances. You could go to Perks or Maxlor was fantastic for Misfits, but we're going somewhere special today. We're going with a champion, not a player, and it's none other than the likes of Heimerdinger. That's right, guys. Raise your dongers, 3-0 in Week 1 in this Fiesta world we're living in patch 8.11. I was surprised that it took this long to see the donger hit the rift, and he was the MVC, most valuable champion in Europe. You could probably make an argument for Aatrox because he was actually solid, and in some of these games, Heimerdinger was not actually, maybe contributing as much as some of the other champions in the league. But 25.0 KDA, 3-0, and a damage per minute of 480. This guy, he just wins on the competitive scene. 10-1 across all time played, but I mean, the 3-0 this week was just amazing. What a way to kick off the summer split in EU with that Vitality bottom lane of Fiddlesticks Heimerdinger. This is something you play with your buddy in normal games to basically troll the three other pre-made guys. You just pick a troll bottom lane because they were trash talking in Champ Select, so you go Fiddlesticks Heimer and you carry the game, and that's kind of what they did in that matchup against Splice. And then G2 was also running it back-to-back games for Hjarnan on the Heimerdinger. His impact was a little less than what I thought Attila put forth on the Donger in their opening match against Splice, but what a world we're living in right now in 8.11 with so much Heimerdinger and Aatrox, who really, it should have been dual MVP awards or MVC awards for the likes of Aatrox and Heimerdinger. Right before his rework, it turns out Aatrox is actually a busted champion and dominating every league. Good job, Riot.